What if everything we were taught about the origins of human civilization is missing a chapter? Not because historians lied, not because there was a conspiracy, but because the evidence, buried under thousands of years of sediment, ocean water, and time itself, was simply waiting to be found. In the last decade, a series of discoveries have quietly begun to reshape what archaeologists, geneticists, and geologists thought they knew about the ancient world. Structures older than the pyramids, genetic signals that point to populations no one has yet named. Carbon dates that push the boundaries of written history back further than the academic mainstream has been comfortable acknowledging. This is not a story about myths or legends. This is a story about data, and what that data is beginning to suggest. For most of the 20th century, the story of human civilization followed a relatively clean and confident arc. Anatomically, modern humans emerged in Africa roughly 300,000 years ago. For tens of thousands of years, they lived as hunter-gatherers, mobile, resourceful, but fundamentally pre-civilizational. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something changed. The last ice age ended, glaciers retreated, sea levels rose, and in the fertile crescent of the ancient Near East, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, humans began to settle. They planted crops, they domesticated animals, they built the first permanent structures, and from those first humble villages, the great civilizations of Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, and China eventually emerged. This was the story, tidy, linear, and universally taught. The oldest known city was Uruk in what is now Iraq, dating to around 4,500 BCE. The oldest known writing emerged in Sumer shortly after. The oldest known monumental architecture, the pyramids of Giza, were constructed around 2560 BCE. Human civilization, as we knew it, was roughly 6,000 years old. That consensus held for a very long time. And then, the ground began to shift beneath it. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd named Savak Yildiz was walking the limestone ridges of southeastern Turkey when he noticed something unusual protruding from the soil. He reported it. Archaeologists arrived. And what they uncovered over the following decades would become one of the most disorienting archaeological finds in modern history. The site is called Göbekli Tepe, and it is extraordinary not just for what it is, but for when it was built. Carved directly into the bedrock of an Anatolian hilltop are massive T-shaped limestone pillars, some standing up to 6 meters tall and weighing between 10 and 20 tons. They are arranged in circular enclosures, decorated with intricate carvings of animals: foxes, lions, vultures, scorpions, executed with a precision and artistry that speaks to a sophisticated visual culture. And at the center of each enclosure, like silent sentinels, stand 2 taller pillars, their surfaces carved to suggest humanoid forms with arms and belts. The carbon dating results, when they arrived, stopped researchers cold. Göbekli Tepe was constructed approximately 11,600 years ago. That is roughly 6,000 years before Stonehenge, around 7,000 years before the earliest Egyptian pyramids, and, crucially, it predates the invention of agriculture. According to the traditional model, the people who built Göbekli Tepe should not have existed. They should have been nomadic hunter-gatherers, incapable of organizing the labor, the logistics, or the symbolic thinking required to construct something like this. And yet, there it is, buried deliberately, as if someone wanted it preserved, waiting 12 millennia to be rediscovered. Göbekli Tepe alone would be enough to prompt serious questions. But it is not alone, and that is where the story becomes genuinely unsettling. In the shallow coastal waters off the southern coast of India, near the Gulf of Kambat, sonar surveys conducted in 2001 and later revisited revealed what appeared to be geometric structures on the ocean floor. Regular shapes, right angles, objects that resisted easy natural explanation. The site sits at a depth of roughly 40 meters in water that would have been dry land approximately 12,000 years ago, during the period of rapid post-glacial sea level rise. Artifacts dredged from the site, including what may be worked wood, returned carbon dates ranging from 7,500 to nearly 9,500 years before present. The Indian government commissioned further surveys, though the findings remain debated among researchers. The structures have not been definitively identified, but neither have they been convincingly explained away. In the Mediterranean, a similar pattern has emerged. The submerged ruins off the coast of Greece, near the island of Zakynthos, initially excited researchers when they were first reported, though subsequent analysis suggested they may be natural formations of bacterial origin. This is precisely the kind of careful, methodical back and forth that characterizes legitimate scientific inquiry. Not every anomaly is a discovery, but the frequency with which anomalies are appearing in coastal shallows around the world, areas that were dry land during the last ice age, has led a growing number of geologists and archaeologists to argue that we may be systematically missing an entire chapter of human prehistory, one that sank. DNA studies have added another layer of complexity to the picture. In 2015, a landmark genetic analysis of ancient human remains published in the journal Nature identified a previously unknown ancestral population that the researchers labeled Ancient North Eurasians. This group contributed genetic material to populations across an enormous geographic range, from Western Europe to the Americas. But their precise origins, their culture, and the nature of their society remain archaeologically invisible. They left genes. They left almost nothing else that we have found. Which raises an obvious question: where did they live? And what happened to the physical evidence of their existence? Then there are the ancient texts themselves. The Sumerian King List, one of the oldest known written documents, dating to around 2100 BCE, contains a fascinating and deeply strange passage. Before the Great Flood, it states, kings ruled for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, kingship descended from heaven again, and the reigns shortened to human scale. For most of modern history, this was dismissed as mythology, a literary device. But researchers studying the text have noted that the pre-flood kings are listed with a specificity, names, locations, regnal periods, that does not read like allegory. It reads like record-keeping. Imprecise, numerologically inflated perhaps, but record-keeping nonetheless. The question of what, if anything, it was recording has never been fully answered. In Egypt, the inventory stele, a limestone tablet discovered in the 19th century near the Great Sphinx, contains an inscription in which the pharaoh Khufu, traditionally credited with building both the Great Pyramid and the Sphinx, refers to restoring the Sphinx as an already ancient monument. If taken at face value, this would place the original construction of the Sphinx before Khufu's reign, which ran from approximately 2589 to 2566 BCE. Geologist Robert Schoch of Boston University has argued, based on weathering patterns in the limestone body of the Sphinx, that erosion consistent with prolonged rainfall, rather than the wind and sand erosion typical of the Saharan environment for the last several thousand years, suggests the Sphinx may be significantly older than Egyptology has traditionally maintained. This hypothesis remains contested. Egyptologists point to the lack of corroborating archaeological evidence. But Schoch's core argument, that the weathering pattern is real and requires an explanation, has not been conclusively refuted. And then there's the matter of the Younger Dryas. Around 12,800 years ago, Earth's climate underwent a sudden and dramatic reversal. Temperatures plummeted. Ice sheets that had been retreating began to re-advance. Megafauna across North America went extinct in a geological eye blink. The cause of this event, known as the Younger Dryas Impact Hypothesis, has been the subject of fierce academic debate since 2007, when a team of researchers published evidence suggesting that a fragmenting comet or asteroid struck or exploded above the North American ice sheet. Subsequent studies have found nanodiamonds, platinum anomalies, and spherules consistent with an extraterrestrial impact event at Younger Dryas boundary layers at sites across 4 continents. A 2018 paper in the Journal of Geology, a peer-reviewed publication with no connection to alternative history circles, concluded that the evidence for a cosmic impact at this boundary was strong enough to warrant serious scientific attention. If a catastrophic impact event did occur 12,800 years ago, it would have devastated human populations in the affected regions, triggered flooding, fires, and climate disruption on a civilization-ending scale, and would neatly explain why the archaeological record before that date is so sparse. Here is the problem at the heart of this investigation. And it is a genuine problem, not a manufactured one. The traditional archaeological model assumes that absence of evidence is evidence of absence. If a civilization existed before the Younger Dryas, before the end of the Ice Age, before the great flooding of coastal lowlands, we should be able to find traces of it. Pottery, middens, burial sites, tools, the material culture that every human society leaves behind. But consider where those people would have lived. During the last Ice Age, sea levels were approximately 120 meters lower than they are today. The areas of the world that were most habitable, temperate, well-watered, rich in marine resources, were the coastal plains and river deltas that are now underwater. The continental shelves, the shallow seas, the very places that modern archaeology has the greatest difficulty investigating. We have mapped less than 25% of the ocean floor with high-resolution sonar. The shallow coastal shelves, the most likely locations for Ice Age human settlement, are among the least systematically surveyed. We are, in a very real sense, looking for a lost world in the one place on Earth we have barely looked. And Göbekli Tepe deepens the mystery rather than resolving it. Because Göbekli Tepe is not a beginning, it is a culmination. The precision of its stonework, the sophistication of its iconography, the sheer organizational capacity required to build it. These do not suggest a society taking its first steps toward complexity. They suggest a society that already knew what it was doing. The question archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led the excavations at the site until his death in 2014, never fully resolved was, where did that knowledge come from? Hunter-gatherers do not spontaneously develop the symbolic vocabulary visible in Göbekli Tepe's carvings. They do not spontaneously coordinate the quarrying and transport of 20-ton stones without prior experience of large-scale collective labor. Something preceded Göbekli Tepe. Something taught the people who built it what organized, purposeful construction looked like. And whatever that something was, we have not found it yet. The researchers working at the edges of this question are not fringe figures. They are published academics working within established institutions, though their conclusions often place them at odds with the mainstream of their fields. Graham Hancock, a journalist and author rather than a credentialed academic, has written extensively about the possibility of a pre-12,000 BCE civilization, most notably in his 2019 book America Before, which drew on genuine peer-reviewed research, including the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis and pre-Clovis archaeological sites in the Americas, to construct a coherent, if speculative, case for earlier complex human society. His work is often dismissed by professional archaeologists, sometimes fairly and sometimes not. But in 2022, he became the subject of renewed public attention when he appeared on a popular podcast alongside Flint Knapper and archaeologist Flint Dibble, in a debate that drew millions of viewers and brought these questions to a mass audience for the first time. More credentialed voices have also weighed in. Danny Natawijaya, a geologist at the Indonesian Institute of Sciences, has published peer-reviewed research on the site of Gunung Padang, a terraced megalithic site in West Java that, according to core samples and carbon dating he conducted, may contain constructed layers dating as far back as 20,000 years before present. His findings were published in Archaeological Prospection in 2023, and while they remain controversial, they have not been dismissed outright. They have been debated, which is precisely how science is supposed to work. Archaeologist David Wengrow of University College London, co-author of the influential 2021 book The Dawn of Everything with the late David Graeber, has argued from a different direction that the conventional narrative of civilization's origins is far too linear and deterministic. His work, which draws on decades of archaeological fieldwork across the ancient Near East, suggests that early human societies were far more complex, far more politically sophisticated, and far more varied in their social organization than the standard model allows. The idea that complexity was invented once, in one place, and spread outward in a single direction is, Wengrow argues, not supported by the evidence. And paleoclimatologist Dr. James Kennett of the University of California, Santa Barbara, one of the lead authors on the original Younger Dryas impact hypothesis papers, has continued to publish supporting evidence for a cosmic impact event at the onset of the Younger Dryas. His team's work, spanning more than a decade, has identified impact markers at sites from South America to the Middle East, at a stratigraphic level that corresponds precisely to the period of climatic disruption around 12,800 years ago. The implications of that work for the fate of human populations living in coastal and temperate regions at that time remain largely unexplored. There are several ways to interpret the accumulating body of evidence, and intellectual honesty requires holding all of them simultaneously, rather than collapsing too quickly toward any single conclusion. The most conservative interpretation is that the traditional model of civilization's origins is broadly correct, but incomplete. That Göbekli Tepe represents an isolated flowering of complexity among otherwise pre-agricultural peoples, a ritual center that required seasonal convergence of multiple hunter-gatherer groups rather than a permanent, settled population. That the submerged structures identified by sonar surveys around the world are either natural formations or the remains of much later, post-agricultural settlements. that the genetic signals pointing to unknown ancestral populations reflect migration patterns we simply have not yet traced, rather than the remnants of a lost society. This interpretation is defensible. It is also the one that requires the least revision of established models. A second interpretation, more speculative but not without evidential support, is that the end of the last ice age, and specifically the rapid sea level rise and possible cosmic impact events of the Younger Dryas period, erased a significant portion of the archaeological record of early complex human society. That populations living on the productive coastal plains and river deltas of the pre-12,000 BCE world developed levels of social organization, symbolic culture, and possibly architectural sophistication that we would recognize as proto-civilizational, and that the evidence for this society now lies beneath 40 to 120 meters of seawater across the world's continental shelves. This is not a claim that can currently be proven, but it is also not a claim that can be disproven, because the survey work required to investigate it has barely begun. A third interpretation, the most radical and the one that requires the most careful handling, is that genuine civilization, in the sense of organized, literate, architecturally sophisticated society, is significantly older than the current consensus acknowledges. This interpretation draws on the ancient textual traditions of multiple cultures, Sumerian, Egyptian, Indian, Mesoamerican, that preserve accounts of great antiquity, of floods that reshaped the world, of knowledge transmitted from a time before memory. It does not require us to accept these accounts literally. It only requires us to ask whether they might preserve, in distorted and mythologized form, a cultural memory of something real. None of these interpretations is certain. What is certain is that the questions are legitimate, that the evidence is real, and that the field of archaeology is actively, rigorously, sometimes contentiously working through what it means. There is a particular kind of humility that science demands of its practitioners, and occasionally fails to deliver. The humility to sit with uncertainty, to acknowledge that the map is not the territory, and that the absence of a mark on the map does not mean the territory does not exist. We have been doing archaeology on dry land, in the places where records survived, in the languages we learned to read, with the tools available to each generation of researchers. And we have built an impressive, detailed, largely coherent picture of how human civilization developed. We should be proud of that achievement, but we have also been working with an incomplete data set, perhaps profoundly incomplete. The coastal shelves of the world, the most habitable regions of the Ice Age Earth, remain largely unexamined. The genetic record is being decoded but not yet fully interpreted. The ancient texts have been studied for their literary content far more thoroughly than for whatever historical signal they might contain, and the hard evidence of sites like Göbekli Tepe keeps insisting that the story began earlier and ran deeper than the standard timeline allows. The mystery of human origins is not closed. If anything, it is more open than it has been in a generation, and the discoveries that will reshape it most profoundly have almost certainly not been made yet. They are waiting, as Göbekli Tepe waited, in the places we have not yet thought to look. 12,000 years of silence, and the ground is just beginning to speak.